His writings will help thousands of people, but not him. He was a very compassionate man. He felt voidness and was afraid of it. He failed to become an overman, the creation of his own. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche, and this is his story. Nietzsche was born in 1844 in nowadays Eastern Germany, at that time Saxony, Prussia, in a religious family. His father was a Lutheran pastor, and he introduced Friedrich to the Christian faith at a young age. When Nietzsche was 4, after long horrible suffering from brain disease, his father died at just the age of 35. A year later, his younger brother Ludwig also died. The sequence of horrible losses in the life of a young philosopher, his exposure to the unneeded suffering of his dad, would likely lay some of the groundwork for what would ultimately become the basis of Nietzsche's later work. Growing up, most of his childhood, the philosopher spent in loneliness, having rare interactions with his peers. This solitary confinement might be an explanation for his capacity to think critically, which would be needed for him during his time studying theology at the University of Bonn. After just a semester there, he would dispute many things taught about religion, hence, once and for all, abandoning faith. Later in the letter to his religious sister, he would write, "Hence the ways of men part. If you wish to strive for peace of soul and pleasure, then believe. If you wish to be a devotee of truth, then inquire." From here, he would go on to study philology, the study of the history of language, at the University of Leipzig. Here, he excelled to such an extent that, while still only in his mid-20s, he secured a position as a professor of classical philology at the University of Basel, making him the youngest professor ever hired, a record that still stands to this day. After just a year in this role, he would leave the position mainly due to his rising poor health, caused by syphilis caught in a brothel. Another reason is his disappointment in the academy. Later, he would state that guidance to think independently in academia is now replaced by encouraging everyone to embrace their own special traits and personality, a practice that Nietzsche would describe as a mark of barbarity. He would come back to cold and familiar isolation. From now on, the philosopher would live as a nomad, traveling around Europe, looking for places with suitable conditions for poor health. Most of the time awake, he would spend thinking, walking, and writing. It was during this period of time when he introduced to the world his most influential works, The Gay Science, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, On the Genealogy of Morals, and Human All Too Human. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. Nietzsche wrote this in The Gay Science, and it is perhaps one of his most popular passages. When I first read it, it seemed to me that the philosopher was celebrating humanity's superiority over God. The phrase, "and we have killed him," is particularly bold, as God is often portrayed as the most powerful. At first glance, the assassination of God by humans appears as a triumph. However, Nietzsche infused these words with a warning. He feared that the decline of Christian faith in Europe would also signify the fall of morality and rationalism, leading to eventual despair and anarchy. To prevent such a scenario, he felt the urge to create an alternative way of viewing life. The fundamental step toward figuring out this alternative meaning was the realization of the absurdity of universal truth. That is, as he stated, there are no facts, only interpretations. So, by agreeing with Nietzsche, we are stating that there is no objective truth, and therefore everything is subjective. Nietzsche foresaw this possible conclusion. Everything is subjective, you say, but already this is interpretation. The subject is nothing given, rather it is something invented, stuck behind the interpretation. Is it ultimately necessary to put an interpreter still behind the interpretation? Already this is the invention, hypothesis. Understanding this, Nietzsche would turn his priorities to the arts, believing that disciplines like music, literature, philosophy, and theater would make up for the voidness that the pursuit of meaning was giving to humanity. He once said, "We have art so that we may not perish by the truth." As time passed, Nietzsche started to realize that cultural arts and humanities could potentially degrade due to their foundational relation with society. Therefore, the philosopher started to think about the philosophy that may separate one from the social mechanism, leaving a person to pave his own path to meaning and giving one the ability to express oneself independently. This philosophy is now known as Übermensch, or Overman. The concept was introduced in Nietzsche's book Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Übermensch defines a transcendent individual who creates their own meaning and purpose, the individual who exceeds traditional notions of good and evil and societal expectations. Übermensch is a selfish being, sometimes even aggressive, very determined, and concentrated on a particular goal. This is very different from the Christian morality of acceptance of misery. In other words, the Übermensch won't give his other cheek when you hit one. The concept of the Overman might seem sort of extremist and selfish. However, at its core it serves as a pinnacle of human potential. That is, a person can't reach it, but can constantly aspire to it, as a side effect overcoming his fears and improving oneself. In the same book, Nietzsche wrote, "The world is the will to power and nothing besides," first time introducing the concept of will to power. The philosopher states that will to power works when you desire personal growth. It is important to note that the word power here does not necessarily imply physical power or power in terms of dominance over others. It implies the power to overcome your own self. Spiritual and psychological mastery over oneself and continuous growth represent the will to power, what Nietzsche perceived as the ultimate goal. Overman should always strive for an idealized version of oneself. The path to it is not smooth, however. Being an overman is synchronized with constant suffering, and Nietzsche accepts it as an inevitable fact. Nietzsche treats suffering as death. That is, we all know that we're going to die, so why should we fear it somehow? We just deal with it. The same thing is true for suffering. An overman knows that suffering is inevitable, so he just deals with it. This philosophy is different from Schopenhauer's, where Schopenhauer advocated for minimalization of suffering, as opposed to Nietzsche, who supports embracing suffering. As Nietzsche famously stated, "To live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering." And Nietzsche suffered. As Nietzsche kept writing and living alone in the mountains, working on his big philosophical projects, he began to show signs of declining mental health. When he was 44, the famous Turin incident went down. Seeing a horse being flogged by its driver, Nietzsche intervened, embracing the horse and subsequently collapsing to the ground, yelling, "I understand you, I understand you." This incident showed the philosopher's ability to demonstrate compassion and weakness, and hence it becomes evident that Nietzsche was not an overman. By his own standards, he might have been considered a failure. His books didn't sell, and during his lifetime, he never gained public recognition. The year 1900, Nietzsche died of a stroke at the age of 55. His last words were, "Mother, I am a fool." Although Nietzsche went largely unnoticed during his lifetime, his ideas have gained significant popularity in the aftermath. In the era of modern technology and advancements in science, an increasing number of individuals are distancing themselves from traditional religious beliefs. Nietzsche's philosophy has experienced a resurgence in relevance within today's evolving intellectual landscape. Nietzsche's writings now serve as a guide for individuals navigating the complexities of modern life, offering insights and perspectives that resonate with the challenges and uncertainties of the contemporary world.